There are moments in life that don't feel like ordinary moments. Moments where something inside you begins to shift in a way that you cannot fully explain, where the world around you looks the same but your experience of it feels different, deeper, almost as if you are starting to see through the surface of reality instead of just reacting to it. You may have noticed it recently, this quiet but persistent feeling that something is changing, that your thoughts are not the same as they used to be, that your reactions are evolving, and that the things which once felt certain are beginning to lose their hold over you, creating a sense of tension between who you were and who you are becoming. Most people ignore this feeling because it does not come with clear instructions or immediate answers, and the mind prefers certainty over transformation. But what you are experiencing right now is not confusion, and it is not a loss of direction. It is the beginning of a process that only a small number of people become aware of while it is happening. A process where your perception starts to shift, your identity begins to evolve, and your reality gradually reorganizes itself to match the changes that are taking place within you. This is the moment where everything starts to feel slightly out of place, where comfort begins to fade, where clarity has not yet fully arrived, and where the space in between those two states becomes the most important part of your journey, because it is within that space that your old patterns begin to break down and your new awareness starts to form. It may feel uncomfortable, it may feel uncertain, and at times it may even feel isolating. But what you are stepping into is not a breakdown of your life, it is a reconfiguration of how you experience it at the deepest level. If you have felt this recently, if there has been a growing sense that something inside you is changing even if you cannot fully define it, then this is not random and it is not something you should ignore, because what you are experiencing is the beginning of a shift that has already started, a shift that does not wait for your permission and does not reverse once it has begun. The only question is whether you will understand what is happening while you are in it, or spend your time resisting something that is meant to move you forward. In this video, you are going to understand what this shift really is, why it begins with discomfort instead of clarity, why your perception starts rewriting your reality, why you begin losing interest in what once defined you, why time itself starts to feel different, why you start trusting yourself in a way you never did before, why synchronistic patterns begin to appear, and finally, why you will reach a point where you realize that none of this was accidental and that every step you have taken has been leading you toward this exact moment. And once you understand this, you will not be able to see your life the same way again, because what you are about to realize is not just information, it is awareness, and awareness does not fade once it is seen. It changes the way you think, the way you act, and the way you move forward from this point on. The beginning of a real shift in your life does not arrive with clarity, excitement, or a sudden sense of purpose. Instead, it begins quietly, almost invisibly, with a subtle but undeniable discomfort that starts to grow inside you, a feeling that something is changing even if nothing around you appears different on the surface. You wake up in the same environment, you follow the same routine, you interact with the same people, yet there is a strange sense that none of it feels the way it used to, as if the emotional connection you once had with your own life has slightly faded, leaving behind a gap that you cannot easily explain or ignore. This is the moment where most people misunderstand what is happening, because the human mind is conditioned to seek stability and familiarity. And when something begins to shift internally, the mind immediately interprets it as a problem that needs to be fixed, rather than a transformation that needs to be understood. You may start questioning yourself, wondering why your motivation feels different, why your patience is thinner, why your tolerance for certain situations is disappearing, and why things that once brought you comfort now feel heavy and exhausting. These questions feel urgent, almost alarming, because they challenge the identity you have been living with for so long, and the natural instinct is to try to return to that previous state where everything felt predictable and controlled. However, what you are experiencing is not a breakdown. It is the early stage of a reconstruction that is happening at a deeper level than your conscious mind can immediately process. The version of you that felt comfortable in your previous reality was built on a certain set of beliefs, habits, and perceptions, and as those internal structures begin to shift, the external world that once matched them starts to feel misaligned. This misalignment creates tension, and that tension is what you perceive as discomfort, but in reality it is the signal that your identity is evolving beyond the environment that once defined it. In this phase, you may find yourself losing interest in things that once seemed important, not because those things have objectively changed, but because your internal frequency no longer resonates with them in the same way. Conversations that once felt engaging now feel empty. Goals that once felt meaningful now feel forced, and routines that once gave you a sense of control now feel restrictive rather than supportive. This can create a deep sense of confusion because it feels as though you are losing parts of yourself without gaining anything new to replace them, and that uncertainty can be uncomfortable enough to push many people back into old patterns simply to regain a sense of familiarity. But what makes this moment so significant is that it represents a threshold, a space between two versions of yourself where the old identity is dissolving but the new identity has not yet fully formed. This in-between state is naturally unstable, and that instability is not a flaw but a necessary condition for transformation, because nothing can expand while remaining completely intact. Every meaningful shift requires a period where the previous structure weakens, where certainty fades, and where the mind is forced to operate without the comfort of clear answers. The challenge is that discomfort often feels like a signal to retreat, to distract yourself, to fill the silence with noise, or return to habits that temporarily restore a sense of normalcy. You may feel the urge to scroll endlessly, to surround yourself with familiar distractions, or to seek validation from others who still operate within the mindset you are unconsciously moving away from. These actions provide short-term relief, but they also slow down the process of transformation because they pull your attention back toward a version of reality that no longer aligns with who you are becoming. If, instead of resisting this discomfort, you allow yourself to stay present within it, something begins to change in a way that is subtle but powerful. You start to observe your thoughts rather than react to them automatically. You begin to notice patterns in your behavior that were previously invisible, and you develop a level of awareness that creates distance between who you were and who you are becoming. This awareness does not immediately remove the discomfort, but it transforms your relationship with it, turning it from something you fear into something you can learn from. As this process continues, the confusion that once felt overwhelming begins to reorganize itself into clarity. Not because external circumstances suddenly improve, but because your internal perspective becomes sharper and more aligned. You begin to understand that the discomfort was never a sign that something was wrong, but a sign that something was changing at a fundamental level, and that change required you to let go of attachments that were no longer serving your growth. What you are experiencing in this phase is not the loss of your identity, but the refinement of it. A process where everything that is not truly aligned with your deeper self is gradually stripped away, leaving behind a more authentic and stable foundation. This process can feel isolating at times, because as your internal world shifts, your external environment may not immediately reflect that change, creating a temporary gap between your inner experience and your outer reality. However, this gap is not permanent. It is simply the space where your new reality is being formed. The most important thing to understand is that this discomfort is not random, and it is not happening to you without purpose. It is the beginning of a transition that is moving you away from a life that was built on unconscious patterns and toward a life that is shaped by awareness and intentional choice. The reason it feels intense is because it is not a surface-level change. It is a deep restructuring of how you think, how you perceive, and how you relate to the world around you. If you can remain present through this phase without trying to escape it, without forcing yourself back into old patterns, and without assuming that something is wrong, you will begin to notice a shift in your internal state that gradually replaces confusion with clarity and resistance with acceptance. This is the moment where the transformation starts to feel real, not because everything becomes easy, but because you begin to trust the process rather than fight against it. So if you are feeling this discomfort right now, if things no longer feel the way they used to, and if you sense that something inside you is changing even if you cannot fully explain it, understand that this is not the end of stability but the beginning of a new form of alignment. You are not losing control of your life. You are moving beyond a version of control that was limited by your previous understanding of yourself. And the reason it feels uncomfortable is simple. Comfort belongs to the identity you are leaving behind, and growth requires you to step into a space where that comfort no longer exists. At least not in the way you once knew it. What most people call reality is not as fixed or solid as it appears, because what you experience every day is not the world as it truly is, but the world as your mind interprets it through layers of belief, memory, and expectation that have been built over time. During a quantum shift, one of the most powerful and often overlooked changes happens at the level of perception, where the way you see things begins to subtly transform, and that transformation starts to alter your entire experience of life without requiring anything external to immediately change. At first, this shift in perception is almost unnoticeable, because it does not arrive as a dramatic revelation or a sudden moment of clarity, but as a gradual adjustment in how you interpret situations, people, and possibilities. You may begin to notice that things which once felt overwhelming no longer carry the same emotional weight, or that challenges which once seemed impossible now appear manageable, not because the circumstances themselves have changed, but because the lens through which you are viewing them is evolving. This is where many people fail to recognize the significance of what is happening, because they are conditioned to believe that change must come from the outside, that opportunities must appear before they can feel hopeful, and that reality must shift physically before they can respond differently. However, the truth is that perception always comes first, and reality follows, because the way you interpret your environment determines how you act within it, and your actions are what shape the outcomes you experience. As your perception begins to shift, you start to question assumptions that once felt unquestionable, and this can feel both empowering and unsettling at the same time. You may realize that many of the limitations you accepted were not absolute truths, but interpretations that were shaped by past experiences or external influences. And this realization can create a sense of instability because it challenges the foundation of how you have understood your life up to this point. In this phase, you are no longer seeing reality through a passive lens. You are actively participating in how it is constructed within your mind. This means that you begin to recognize patterns that were previously invisible, such as how your expectations influence your reactions, how your beliefs shape your decisions, and how your internal dialogue affects your emotional state. These insights may seem small at first, but they represent a profound shift in awareness, because they reveal that your experience of reality is not something that simply happens to you, but something that is constantly being shaped by the way you perceive it. One of the most noticeable effects of this shift is the way possibilities begin to expand. Situations that once felt closed or limited start to reveal new angles, new solutions, and new outcomes that were always present but were filtered out by your previous mindset. This can create a sense of curiosity and openness that replaces the rigidity of old thought patterns, allowing you to approach life with a level of flexibility that was not available to you before. However, this expansion of perception also comes with a challenge, because it requires you to let go of certainty, and certainty is something the mind naturally clings to in order to feel safe. As you begin to see more possibilities, you also become aware of how much you previously limited yourself, and that awareness can feel uncomfortable because it highlights the gap between who you were and who you are becoming. It forces you to confront the fact that your previous reality was not fixed, but shaped by perspectives that you now have the ability to change. This is the moment where perception becomes power, because once you understand that your view of reality is not absolute, you gain the ability to consciously shift it in a direction that aligns with your growth. Instead of reacting automatically to circumstances, you begin to choose how you interpret them, and that choice creates a ripple effect that influences your emotions, your decisions, and ultimately your outcomes. As this process continues, you may notice that your reactions become more intentional, your thoughts become more focused, and your sense of control becomes more internal rather than dependent on external validation. You start to realize that while you cannot always control what happens around you, you have a significant influence over how you experience it, and that influence is enough to change the direction of your life in ways that once seemed impossible. What makes this shift truly powerful is that it does not require you to wait for the world to change before you feel different. It allows you to change first, and in doing so, it gradually transforms the way the world responds to you. People may begin to treat you differently, opportunities may begin to appear more frequently, and situations may begin to unfold in ways that feel aligned rather than random, not because reality has suddenly become more favorable, but because your perception has aligned with a different set of possibilities. At this stage, you are no longer trapped within the limitations of your previous mindset, because you have begun to see beyond it, and once you see beyond it, you cannot fully return to it. The awareness you have gained creates a new baseline for how you interpret your experiences, and that baseline continues to evolve as you move further into the shift. If you stay present within this process, allowing your perception to expand without forcing it back into old patterns, you will begin to notice that your reality starts to reorganize itself in subtle but meaningful ways. The changes may not always be immediate or dramatic, but they are consistent and they build over time, creating a new experience of life that feels more aligned with who you are becoming. This is why perception is not just a passive filter, but an active force, because it determines the version of reality you are able to access at any given moment. When your perception changes, you are not simply seeing the world differently, you are interacting with a different version of it, one that reflects your current level of awareness. So if you feel that your perspective is shifting, that your understanding of life is becoming deeper, and that your interpretation of reality is no longer the same as it once was, recognize that this is not confusion but evolution. You are not losing your grip on reality, you are gaining the ability to see it more clearly, and that clarity is what allows you to move beyond the limitations that once defined your experience. One of the most misunderstood parts of a real internal shift is not what you gain, but what you begin to lose, because as your awareness expands and your perception evolves, there is a natural and unavoidable consequence that follows, and that is the gradual loss of interest in things that once felt normal, comfortable, and even important to you. This does not happen suddenly or dramatically, but slowly, almost quietly, in a way that feels confusing at first, because nothing external may appear to have changed, yet your internal response to those same experiences begins to feel different. You may notice that conversations that once engaged you now feel repetitive or empty, not because the people around you have changed, but because the level at which you are processing those interactions has shifted, creating a disconnect between your current awareness and the patterns you previously accepted without question. Activities that once provided distraction or comfort may begin to feel like a waste of time, not in a judgmental sense, but in a way that makes it difficult to fully immerse yourself in them, as if your attention is being pulled somewhere deeper, somewhere more meaningful that you cannot yet fully define. This phase often feels like confusion, because it creates the illusion that you are losing motivation or direction, when in reality, you are losing alignment with a version of life that no longer reflects who you are becoming. The mind, however, does not immediately interpret it this way, and instead may label this experience as boredom, dissatisfaction, or even emptiness, leading you to question whether something is wrong with you or whether you have somehow lost the drive that once defined your actions. What is actually happening is far more significant than a simple loss of interest, because this is the process of detachment from patterns that were once reinforced by habit rather than conscious choice. Many of the things you were previously drawn to were not necessarily aligned with your deeper self, but were instead the result of repetition, social conditioning, or emotional dependency, and as your awareness increases, those unconscious attachments begin to weaken, making it difficult to continue engaging with them in the same way. This creates a tension that can feel uncomfortable, because while you are moving away from what no longer aligns, you may not yet have a clear connection to what does align, leaving you in a space where you feel disconnected from both your past and your future. This in-between state can feel isolating because it often separates you from environments, conversations, and even relationships that once felt familiar, and without a clear understanding of what is happening, it is easy to interpret this as loss rather than transformation. The instinct in this moment is to fill that gap, to replace the fading interest with something new as quickly as possible, or to return to old patterns simply to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty. However, this impulse can delay the process because the space that is being created is not meant to be filled immediately, but to be experienced, understood, and allowed to expand. That emptiness you feel is not a void that needs to be fixed, but a clearing that is making room for something more aligned to enter your life. As you remain within this phase without forcing a resolution, you begin to notice that your standards are changing, not just in terms of what you do, but in terms of what you are willing to tolerate. You may find that you are less willing to engage in conversations that lack depth, less willing to spend time on activities that do not contribute to your growth, and less willing to compromise your energy for the sake of maintaining familiarity. This is not a sign of disconnection from the world, but a sign of deeper connection to yourself, because you are no longer operating from automatic patterns, but from a growing sense of awareness that is guiding your choices. Over time, this shift in interest begins to reveal a clearer direction, not because you force it, but because as the noise of misalignment fades, what truly resonates becomes easier to recognize. New ideas, new interests, and new opportunities may begin to emerge, often in ways that feel more natural and aligned than anything you experienced before. And this is because they are not being chosen out of habit or external pressure, but out of a genuine connection to your evolving identity. What makes this phase challenging is not the loss itself, but the uncertainty that comes with it, because the mind prefers clarity and immediate answers, while transformation often requires patience and trust in a process that does not always reveal its full direction right away. However, if you can stay present within this uncertainty, without rushing to define it or escape it, you will begin to see that what you are losing was never truly meant to stay, and what is coming will not require you to force it. This is the point where detachment becomes strength, because instead of clinging to what is familiar, you are allowing yourself to move toward what is aligned, even if that path is not yet fully visible. You begin to understand that growth is not about accumulating more experiences, more connections, or more distractions, but about refining your life in a way that reflects who you are becoming at a deeper level. If you look closely, you will realize that this loss of interest is not random but precise, affecting only those areas of your life that no longer match your current state of awareness, while leaving space for new forms of engagement that are more meaningful, more intentional, and more aligned with your direction. This precision is what makes the process so powerful, because it is not taking away everything, but selectively removing what no longer serves your evolution. So if you find yourself feeling disconnected from things that once defined your routine, if your interests are shifting in ways that feel confusing or difficult to explain, understand that this is not a sign that you are losing yourself, but a sign that you are discovering a version of yourself that no longer needs what once felt necessary. The discomfort you feel is not caused by the loss itself, but by the transition between what was familiar and what is becoming possible. And if you can remain within that transition without forcing yourself back into old patterns or rushing to fill the space with something temporary, you will begin to experience a new level of clarity that does not come from external validation, but from internal alignment, a clarity that makes your choices more intentional, your direction more focused, and your sense of self more stable than it has ever been before. One of the most subtle yet powerful signs that a deeper shift is happening within you is not something you see, but something you begin to feel in the way time itself moves through your experience. Because as your awareness expands and your internal state evolves, your relationship with time no longer remains the same, and this change can feel both disorienting and profound at the same time. What once felt slow and predictable may now feel accelerated, while moments that previously passed unnoticed begin to feel more intense, more detailed, and more significant, creating the sensation that time is both speeding up and deepening simultaneously. This change is not random, and it is not an illusion created by distraction or external pressure, but a direct result of your shifting awareness, because time as you experience it is closely connected to how present you are within each moment. When you operate on autopilot, moving through routines without conscious attention, time tends to feel compressed, as if days blend together without distinction, leaving behind a vague sense of passing without depth. However, as your awareness increases, you begin to notice more, to feel more, and to process your experiences at a deeper level, and this heightened presence changes the way time unfolds in your perception. At first, this can feel overwhelming because you become more aware of how much of your life was previously spent without full attention, how many moments passed without being truly experienced, and how much of your time was shaped by unconscious patterns rather than intentional choice. This realization can create a sense of urgency, not driven by fear but by awareness, because you begin to understand that time is not just something that moves forward regardless of your involvement, but something that becomes meaningful only when you are fully present within it. As this awareness continues to expand, you may notice that your priorities begin to shift in ways that feel natural rather than forced, because you become less willing to invest your time in activities that do not align with your growth or your evolving sense of purpose. Distractions that once consumed hours may now feel unfulfilling, not because they have changed, but because your perception of their value has become clearer. This clarity does not come from external pressure or discipline, but from an internal recognition that your time carries weight and that how you spend it directly shapes the reality you experience. Another aspect of this shift is the way decisions begin to feel different, because as your awareness of time deepens, you become more conscious of the consequences of your actions, not in a fearful or restrictive way, but in a way that highlights the importance of each choice. Decisions that once felt minor or insignificant may now carry a sense of impact, because you understand that even small actions contribute to the direction of your life over time. This awareness can feel intense, especially if you were previously accustomed to acting without much reflection, but it also creates a sense of control that is rooted in clarity rather than impulse. At the same time, you may experience moments where time seems to slow down, where your perception becomes so focused that everything around you feels more vivid, more detailed, and more real. These moments often occur when you are fully engaged, when your attention is not divided, and when you are connected to what you are doing in a way that goes beyond surface-level involvement. In these states, time does not disappear, but expands, allowing you to experience more within each moment. And this expansion creates a sense of depth that was not accessible when your awareness was more limited. This dual experience of time, where it feels both faster and deeper, can be confusing if you try to analyze it purely from a logical perspective, but it becomes clear when you recognize that your perception is no longer operating within the same boundaries as before. You are not just moving through time, you are interacting with it differently, and that interaction is shaped by your level of awareness, your presence, and your alignment with your current state of being. As this shift continues, you may also begin to notice patterns in how time seems to align with your actions, where certain moments feel precisely timed, where opportunities appear when you are ready for them, and where events unfold in a way that feels less random and more connected. This does not mean that everything becomes predictable, but it creates a sense that your experience of time is becoming more synchronized with your internal state, as if your awareness is influencing not just how you perceive time, but how you move within it. What makes this phase significant is that it breaks the illusion that time is something separate from you, something that simply passes regardless of your involvement, and replaces it with the understanding that your experience of time is deeply connected to how you live, how you focus, and how you engage with the present moment. This realization shifts your relationship with your own life, because instead of feeling as though time is slipping away uncontrollably, you begin to see that your level of presence determines the quality of the time you experience. If you resist this change, if you try to return to old patterns of distraction or avoidance, time may continue to feel fragmented and inconsistent, creating a sense of pressure without clarity. However, if you allow yourself to adapt to this new perception, to become more present and intentional in how you engage with each moment, you will begin to experience time in a way that feels more aligned, more meaningful, and more connected to your sense of purpose. This is not about controlling time, but about aligning with it, about recognizing that your awareness shapes how time is experienced, and that by becoming more present, more focused, and more intentional, you can transform the way your life unfolds within it. The shift you are experiencing is not just changing what you do, but how you experience every moment of doing it, and that change has the power to redefine the entire trajectory of your life. So if time has begun to feel different to you, if days seem to move faster yet feel more significant, if moments feel more intense and your awareness of how you spend your time has increased, understand that this is not a coincidence or a temporary phase, but a sign that your perception is evolving and that evolution is allowing you to experience life in a way that is deeper, clearer, and more aligned than ever before. One of the most powerful, yet often overlooked transformations that occurs during a deep internal shift is the gradual movement from external dependence to internal trust, a change that does not happen instantly but develops quietly as your awareness strengthens and your perception becomes more aligned with your evolving sense of self. In the earlier stages of your life, much of your decision-making may have been influenced by external validation, by the opinions of others, by the need for approval, or by the fear of making the wrong choice. And this created a pattern where your sense of certainty was tied to factors outside of you rather than rooted within your own understanding. As the shift progresses, something begins to change in the way you relate to your own thoughts and feelings, because instead of immediately seeking confirmation from others or hesitating until you feel completely certain, you start to recognize that there is a deeper layer of awareness within you that already understands what is right for you, even if it cannot always explain itself logically. This awareness does not present itself as loud confidence or forced certainty, but as a subtle clarity, a quiet knowing that emerges without the need for constant justification or external reinforcement. At first, this shift can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because it challenges the patterns you have relied on for stability, and it requires you to let go of the illusion that certainty must come from outside sources. You may find yourself questioning your own instincts, wondering whether you can truly rely on them, especially if you have spent a significant amount of time doubting your own judgment or deferring to the opinions of others. This hesitation is natural, because trusting yourself is not just a mental decision, but a process that involves unlearning the habit of seeking validation and replacing it with a deeper connection to your own internal guidance. As you begin to move through this process, you may notice that your reactions to situations become more grounded, because instead of being driven by fear, urgency, or the need to please others, your decisions start to reflect a clearer understanding of what aligns with your values and your direction. This does not mean that uncertainty disappears, but it changes the way you respond to it, because instead of seeing uncertainty as something that must be eliminated before you act, you begin to accept it as a natural part of growth, something that does not prevent you from moving forward, but simply requires you to trust your ability to adapt. One of the most significant aspects of this shift is the way it alters your relationship with risk. Because when you trust yourself, You are no longer paralyzed by the fear of making mistakes, as you understand that every experience contributes to your growth and that no single decision has the power to define your entire path. This understanding creates a sense of freedom, allowing you to take action with a level of confidence that is not based on guaranteed outcomes, but on your belief in your ability to handle whatever follows. At the same time, this growing sense of self-trust begins to influence how you interact with others because you become less dependent on their approval and more focused on maintaining alignment with your own perspective. This does not lead to isolation or disconnection, but rather to a more authentic way of relating, where your interactions are guided by clarity rather than the need to conform. You may find that you are more selective with your time, more intentional with your energy, and more honest in your communication, as you no longer feel the need to adjust yourself to fit expectations that do not resonate with who you are becoming. As this process continues, your internal voice becomes clearer, not louder or more dominant, but more consistent and reliable, providing a sense of direction that does not fluctuate based on external circumstances. You begin to recognize patterns in your own thinking, to understand the difference between fear-based reactions and intuitive responses, and to develop a level of awareness that allows you to navigate decisions with greater ease and confidence. This clarity does not eliminate challenges, but it changes the way you approach them, because you trust your ability to respond rather than fearing your ability to choose. What makes this shift so powerful is that it redefines the source of your stability, moving it from external conditions to internal alignment, and this creates a form of confidence that is not easily shaken by changes in your environment. When your sense of direction comes from within, you are less affected by uncertainty, less influenced by external pressure, and more capable of maintaining focus even when circumstances are not ideal. This does not mean that you become indifferent to the world around you, but that your relationship with it becomes more balanced, as you are no longer relying on it to provide the validation or certainty that you have learned to generate within yourself. This transformation also affects the way you view your past, because as your self-trust grows, you begin to see previous mistakes or missteps not as failures, but as necessary parts of your development, experiences that contributed to the awareness you now possess. This perspective allows you to release regret and move forward with a sense of continuity, understanding that every phase of your life played a role in shaping your current level of understanding. If you remain engaged with this process, allowing your self-trust to develop without forcing it or undermining it with constant doubt, you will begin to experience a level of stability that is not dependent on perfect conditions or guaranteed outcomes. You will find that your decisions become more aligned, your actions more intentional, and your sense of direction more consistent, creating a foundation that supports your growth in a way that external validation never could. So if you notice that you are beginning to rely less on the opinions of others, that your decisions feel more grounded in your own understanding, and that you are developing a quiet confidence that does not need to be constantly reinforced, recognize that this is not a coincidence, but a clear sign that your internal alignment is strengthening. You are not becoming more isolated or disconnected, but more centered, more aware, and more capable of navigating your life with a sense of clarity that comes from trusting yourself at a deeper level than ever before. There comes a point in the shift where the changes you have been experiencing internally begin to reflect themselves externally in ways that feel almost too precise to dismiss, and this is where many people begin to notice something that they cannot easily explain through logic alone, a pattern of events that seem to align with their thoughts, their needs, or their direction at exactly the right moment, creating the sense that life is no longer unfolding randomly but is responding to something deeper within them. These moments are often described as coincidences, but when they begin to happen repeatedly, with a level of timing and relevance that feels intentional, they start to form a pattern that challenges the idea that everything is purely accidental. At first, these experiences may be subtle, almost easy to ignore, such as thinking about a specific idea and then encountering it again shortly after, or searching for clarity on a particular issue and receiving an answer through an unexpected source. These moments may seem insignificant on their own, but as they accumulate, they begin to create a sense that your internal state is somehow connected to what you are experiencing externally, as if your awareness is interacting with reality in a more direct way than you previously understood. This is where the concept of alignment becomes important, because synchronistic events do not occur in isolation, but emerge as a result of your internal state reaching a level of coherence where your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions begin to move in the same direction. When this alignment is present, your perception becomes sharper, your focus becomes clearer, and your ability to recognize opportunities increases, not because those opportunities suddenly appear out of nowhere, but because your awareness is now tuned to notice them in ways that were not possible before. One of the reasons synchronistic experiences feel so powerful is that they often occur at moments when you are uncertain or searching for direction, providing a form of confirmation that you are moving in alignment with your path. This confirmation does not always come in the form of clear answers or direct guidance, but through subtle signals that reinforce a particular direction, such as meeting the right person at the right time, encountering information that resonates deeply with your current situation, or experiencing events that seem to connect in ways that reveal a larger pattern. However, the presence of these experiences can also create confusion if they are misunderstood, because there is a tendency to either dismiss them completely as coincidence or to assign them more meaning than they actually carry, leading to a sense of dependency on external signs rather than an understanding of the internal state that creates them. The key is not to become attached to the events themselves, but to recognize what they reflect, which is the increasing alignment between your internal awareness and your external experience. As you continue to move through this phase, you may notice that your sense of timing begins to change, because instead of forcing actions or trying to control outcomes, you become more attuned to when something feels right, when to move forward, and when to wait. This does not come from passive observation, but from a deeper connection to your own awareness, allowing you to respond to opportunities with a level of precision that feels natural rather than calculated. In this state, action and timing begin to align, creating results that feel less like effort and more like flow. This shift in timing also affects the way you approach decisions, because you are no longer relying solely on analysis or external input, but are integrating a sense of internal clarity that guides your actions. This clarity does not eliminate uncertainty, but it changes the way you navigate it, because you trust that even if you do not have complete information, your alignment will lead you toward the experiences that contribute to your growth. This trust reduces the need to control every outcome, allowing you to move forward with confidence while remaining open to adjustments along the way. Another important aspect of this phase is the way it changes your perception of cause and effect. Because as synchronistic patterns become more noticeable, you begin to question the traditional idea that events are purely linear and independent of your internal state. Instead, you start to see that your thoughts, your focus, and your level of awareness play a role in shaping the sequence of events you experience, creating a more dynamic relationship between your inner world and your external reality. This does not mean that you control everything that happens, but that you influence the way you interact with what happens, and that interaction creates different outcomes over time. As this understanding deepens, you may also become more aware of how your attention influences what you notice, because the mind naturally filters information based on what it considers relevant, and as your focus shifts, the type of information you receive begins to change. This can create the impression that new opportunities or connections are appearing, when in reality, they were always present but were previously outside of your awareness. This realization reinforces the idea that your experience of reality is not fixed, but shaped by what you are able to perceive and engage with at any given moment. Despite the clarity that synchronistic experiences can bring, it is important to remain grounded within them, because the purpose of these patterns is not to replace your decision-making process, but to enhance your awareness and reinforce your alignment. If you begin to rely on external signs without maintaining internal clarity, you risk losing the balance that allows these experiences to remain meaningful and supportive, rather than confusing or overwhelming. The goal is not to chase signs, but to understand that they reflect a deeper coherence within you that is naturally expressed through your interactions with the world. As you integrate this understanding, you may begin to feel a sense of connection that was not present before, not in a way that removes challenges or difficulties, but in a way that provides context for them, allowing you to see how different experiences contribute to your overall direction. This connection does not require constant confirmation, but develops as a steady awareness that your life is unfolding in a way that is influenced by your level of alignment, your focus, and your willingness to engage with the process of change. Over time, this phase leads to a greater sense of flow, where your actions, your timing, and your experiences begin to align in a way that feels less forced and more natural, creating a rhythm that supports your growth rather than resisting it. This does not mean that everything becomes easy, but that your approach becomes more effective because you are no longer acting against your own awareness, but in harmony with it. This harmony is what allows synchronistic patterns to emerge more consistently as your internal state and external actions become increasingly aligned. If you are experiencing these moments of alignment, where events seem to connect, where timing feels precise, and where your internal state appears to influence your external experience, recognize that this is not a coincidence or a temporary phase, but a sign that your awareness is interacting with reality in a more integrated way. You are not stepping outside of reality, but deeper into it, engaging with it from a level of consciousness that allows you to perceive patterns and connections that were previously hidden. This phase is not about proving that something extraordinary is happening, but about understanding that your experience of life is becoming more coherent, more connected, and more responsive to your internal state. The synchronistic events you notice are not separate from you, but reflections of the alignment you are developing. And as that alignment continues to strengthen, your experience of reality will continue to evolve in ways that feel increasingly intentional, meaningful, and connected to the direction you are moving toward. There comes a moment near the end of a deep internal shift where everything that once felt confusing, chaotic, or uncertain begins to reorganize itself into a form of understanding that is not forced or constructed, but realized, a moment where you no longer feel like you are searching for answers because the questions themselves begin to dissolve, and in their place emerges a quiet but undeniable awareness that what you have been experiencing was never random, never misplaced, and never without direction. This realization does not arrive suddenly as a dramatic breakthrough, but unfolds gradually as the pieces of your experience begin to connect in a way that reveals a pattern that was always present, even when you could not see it. At this stage, you begin to look back at your past, not with confusion or regret, but with a different perspective that allows you to see how each event, each challenge, and each moment of uncertainty contributed to the person you have become. Experiences that once felt like setbacks or mistakes begin to take on a new meaning, not because they have changed, but because your understanding of them has evolved. You start to recognize that what you once interpreted as failure was often a form of redirection, guiding you away from paths that were not aligned with your growth and toward experiences that would eventually shape your awareness in ways you could not have anticipated at the time. This shift in perspective creates a sense of coherence, a feeling that your life is not a series of disconnected events, but a continuous process of development that has been unfolding with a level of precision that you are only now beginning to understand. The randomness that once defined your interpretation of reality begins to fade, replaced by a sense that there has always been an underlying structure, not in the sense of a rigid plan, but as a dynamic process where each experience builds upon the last, creating a trajectory that becomes clearer as your awareness expands. One of the most profound aspects of this realization is the way it changes your relationship with uncertainty, because once you begin to see that your past experiences were not meaningless, you develop a deeper trust in the process itself, allowing you to move forward without the same level of fear or resistance that once accompanied the unknown. You understand that not every step needs to be fully visible in order for the direction to be meaningful, and that clarity often emerges through movement rather than before it. This understanding creates a sense of stability that is not dependent on having all the answers, but on trusting that the process you are part of is leading somewhere significant. As this awareness deepens, you may also notice a shift in how you interpret your current experiences, because instead of immediately labeling situations as good or bad, right or wrong, you begin to see them as part of a larger pattern that is still unfolding. This does not mean that challenges become easy or that discomfort disappears, but that your relationship with them changes as you no longer see them as obstacles that disrupt your path, but as elements that contribute to your growth in ways that may not be immediately obvious. This perspective allows you to release a significant amount of internal resistance, because much of the tension you once felt was created by the need to control outcomes, to avoid uncertainty, and to ensure that everything unfolded according to your expectations. When you begin to understand that your path is not defined by your ability to predict or control every detail, but by your willingness to engage with the process as it unfolds, you create space for a different kind of experience, one that is less rigid and more responsive, allowing you to adapt and evolve without feeling as though you are constantly navigating against resistance. Another important aspect of this phase is the way it changes your sense of identity, because as you recognize the continuity in your experiences, you begin to see yourself not as a fixed version of who you are, but as a dynamic process that is constantly evolving. The person you were in the past is no longer something you need to hold on to or define yourself by, but a stage in your development that contributed to your current level of awareness. This realization allows you to move forward without being limited by previous definitions of yourself, creating a sense of freedom that is rooted in your ability to evolve rather than remain consistent with who you once were. At the same time, this awareness can create a sense of humility, because as you recognize how much of your path was shaped by factors beyond your immediate understanding, you also become more open to the idea that there is still more to learn, more to experience, and more to discover. This openness does not weaken your sense of direction, but strengthens it, because it allows you to remain flexible and responsive, adapting to new insights and experiences without feeling the need to maintain a rigid sense of certainty. As you integrate this realization, you may begin to feel a sense of alignment that was not present before. A feeling that your internal state and your external experiences are no longer in conflict, but are moving in a similar direction. This alignment does not eliminate challenges, but it changes the way you experience them, because you no longer feel as though you are being pushed or pulled in opposing directions, but as though you are moving with a process that is unfolding in a way that makes sense at a deeper level. This is also the point where the idea of purpose begins to take on a different meaning, because instead of being something you are trying to find or define, it becomes something that emerges naturally from your alignment with the process of your own development. You begin to see that your purpose is not a fixed destination, but a continuous expression of your awareness, something that evolves as you evolve, reflecting the direction in which you are moving, rather than a single point you are trying to reach. What makes this stage so powerful is that it removes the need for constant validation, because the sense of meaning you experience is no longer dependent on external confirmation, but arises from your own understanding of how your experiences connect and contribute to your growth. This internal sense of meaning provides a level of stability that is not easily disrupted, because it is not based on temporary outcomes, but on a deeper awareness of the process you are part of. If you remain present within this stage, allowing the realization to deepen without forcing it into a specific form or conclusion, you will begin to experience a level of clarity that is not limited to individual situations, but extends to your overall understanding of your life. This clarity does not answer every question, but it changes the way you approach them, allowing you to engage with uncertainty in a way that feels constructive rather than threatening. So if you have reached a point where your past begins to make sense in a way it never did before, where your experiences feel connected rather than random, and where your sense of direction feels more aligned even if not fully defined, recognize that this is not a coincidence or a temporary insight, but a reflection of the shift you have been moving through. You are not simply understanding your life differently, You are experiencing it from a level of awareness that allows you to see the patterns that were always there, waiting to be recognized. And in that recognition, something changes permanently. Because once you understand that your path has always been unfolding with a certain level of coherence, you no longer feel the same need to resist, to question, or to doubt every step along the way. Instead, you begin to move forward with a sense of trust that is not blind or naive, but grounded in your own experience. A trust that allows you to engage with your life more fully, more intentionally, and more confidently than ever before. This is not the end of your transformation, but the point where you fully recognize that the transformation has been happening all along, and that what once felt like confusion was actually a process of alignment that you are only now beginning to understand. At this point, if you have followed everything carefully, then you already feel it. Not just as an idea, but as something real within you, a recognition that what you have been experiencing is not random confusion or temporary emotion, but a deeper shift that has been unfolding quietly beneath the surface of your everyday life. You can see now that the discomfort had a purpose, that the changes in your perception were not accidents, that the loss of interest was not emptiness but refinement, and that even the way time itself started to feel different was a signal that your awareness was expanding beyond its previous limits. What makes this realization powerful is not just the understanding itself, but the fact that once you see it clearly, you cannot return to the version of yourself who was unaware of it. Because awareness creates a permanent change in how you experience reality. You may still face uncertainty, you may still encounter challenges, and you may still question your direction at times, but you will no longer interpret those moments in the same way, because you now understand that they are part of a larger process that is shaping you into someone more aligned, more aware, and more intentional than before. From this moment forward, the way you respond to your life becomes more important than the events themselves, because the shift you are experiencing is not about controlling everything that happens around you, but about transforming how you engage with it, how you interpret it, and how you move through it with a level of awareness that was not available to you before. This is where real change begins, not in the external circumstances that you are waiting to improve, but in the internal alignment that allows you to navigate those circumstances differently. You are no longer in the phase where you can ignore what you feel or return to patterns that no longer align, because the shift has already started, and once it begins, it continues whether you resist it or move with it. The only difference is how you experience that process, whether it feels like confusion and resistance or clarity and transformation, and that choice is something you now have the awareness to make. So as you move forward from here, do not rush to define everything, do not force clarity before it naturally forms, and do not try to recreate the comfort of your past just to avoid the uncertainty of your growth, because what you are stepping into is not meant to feel exactly like what you left behind. It is meant to expand you, to challenge you, and to reveal a version of yourself that could not exist within the limits of your previous understanding. If this message reached you at a moment where something inside you already felt different, then take that as confirmation that you are not alone in this process, that what you are experiencing has direction even if it does not yet have full clarity, and that the path you are on is unfolding in a way that will make sense the more you continue to move forward with awareness. And if you choose to stay with this process, to observe it instead of resisting it, and to trust the direction it is taking you, then you will begin to notice that your life does not just change over time, but aligns with who you are becoming, creating a reality that reflects your awareness rather than limiting it. Because this is not the end of something you once understood, it is the beginning of something you are only now starting to see, and once you truly see it, there is no going back to the way things were, only forward into what is already unfolding in front of you.